What if the greatest act of love Elrond ever performed was the one thing the movies made look like cruelty? You know the image. Arwen stands in Rivendell, and her father stands across from her with that face. Composed, ancient, the face of someone who has already decided. He wants her to go. He tells her the choice she is making will end her. He looks at Aragorn, this weathered ranger, this wanderer from the margins of the world, and the films give him something that reads like disdain, like a father who has judged and found the candidate wanting. That is not what is happening. This is not a reading pulled from the margins of some obscure appendix. This is not speculation assembled from fragments and wishful thinking. This is what the text actually says when you follow it all the way down. Through the appendices, through unfinished tales, through the council chambers and the volcanic slopes of Oroduin, and 3,000 years of a grief so structural that it has become indistinguishable from the man who carries it. Elrond did not distrust Aragorn. He trusted him completely, and that, in the end, was the problem. The question this video orbits is this. Did Elrond set his condition for Arwen's hand because he believed Aragorn would meet it? Or because some ancient, exhausted part of him hoped, quietly and without admitting it even to himself, that Aragorn would not? Don't answer yet. First, you need to understand what Elrond actually saw when he looked at Aragorn, son of Arathorn. And to understand that, you need to go back, much further back than any film has ever taken you. The appendices of The Return of the King contain a section called The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen. Most readers have encountered it, or believe they have. But there is a detail buried in its early pages that almost no one pauses to examine because it is quiet and it does not announce itself as the revelation it actually is. When Elrond took the infant Aragorn into his care, after Aragorn's father Arathorn was killed by orc arrows when the boy was only 2 years old, he did not simply house him. He did not preserve him as a political asset or a dynastic insurance policy against future need. He gave him a name, Estelle, hope not Aragorn, not his true name and lineage, which Elrond deliberately concealed from the boy for 20 years. For 2 decades, the heir to Isildur's line, the last thread connecting the kingdom of Arnor to the possibility of its restoration, the seed of what would become the reunited Dunedain throne, grew up in Rivendell under a name that meant nothing about kings or destiny or the unfinished business of 3 ages. It meant hope, and only hope, stripped of all the weight that his true name would have imposed. Think about that choice. Elrond had every strategic reason to tell Aragorn who he was from early on. The Rangers of the North needed a lord. The Dunedain were a remnant people waiting for a sign. The political calculus of Middle-earth, at the beginning of the Third Age's final century, was one that would have been served, in almost every measurable way, by revealing Aragorn's identity earlier, and Elrond chose not to do it. He chose to give him a childhood without the weight. That is not the act of a guardian. That is the act of a father. Someone who understood, from his own experience, what it means to carry a name that arrives before you are ready for it. Because Elrond himself has been carrying names he did not choose since before the Second Age began. Half-elven, Lord of Imladris, Keeper of Vilya, son of Eärendil who sailed between worlds. He has been defined by lineage and cosmic role since the Age of Stars, and he protected Aragorn from that for as long as he could with the deliberate care of someone who knew precisely what he was protecting him from. And here is what nobody asks about that choice. Why 20 years? Why that number specifically? The appendices tell us that when Aragorn was 20, Elrond revealed his heritage, gave him the shards of Narsil, and showed him the ring of Barahir. He did this himself. He sat with Aragorn and told him the truth about what he was and what that meant. And it was in that same year that Aragorn first saw Arwen, just returned to Rivendell from Lorien after an absence of decades, and mistook her, in the quality of his astonishment, for Luthien Tinuviel herself. The revelation of Aragorn's identity and Aragorn's first sight of Arwen happened in the same year. Whether by Elrond's design or by the movements of fate that Tolkien always allows to operate between and around the choices of his characters. Fate that bends without breaking free will, that arrives at what it needs without removing the agency of those who carry it. Those two things came together. The burden and the beginning of the love arrived simultaneously, and Elrond was the one standing at the center of both, the one who had made both possible by the choices he had made across 2 decades of fatherhood. Now here is where it gets strange, because to understand Elrond's relationship with Aragorn, you cannot begin with Aragorn. You have to go back much further. You have to go back to Isildur. Unfinished Tales contains a detailed account of the last alliances of elves and men and its aftermath on the slopes of Oroduin. Most people know the broad shape of it from the films, the great battle, Sauron's physical defeat, the ring cut from his hand, the victory that should have ended everything but didn't. What the text records with a specificity that the films compress into spectacle is the moment immediately following the battle's conclusion. Elrond was there, at the foot of Mount Doom, in the heat and the volcanic dark with Círdan at his side and the ring lying within reach of the fire that could unmake it, and he spoke to Isildur directly. The account in Unfinished Tales makes clear that Elrond counseled Isildur to destroy the ring there, at Oroduin, where the fire was, and where the opportunity existed. Isildur looked at the ring in his hand, he looked at the fire, he looked at Elrond, and he said no. Hold that image. Not the cinematic version with its sweeping score and its visual drama. Just 2 figures in the wreckage of a battle that has cost thousands of lives, including the life of Gil-galad, Elrond's king. One of them holding the thing that should be cast into fire. The other one saying, quietly or not so quietly, "No, I will keep this. It is my weregild for my father's death. This belongs to me now." Isildur said no, and Elrond could not make him say yes. Pay attention to this part, because this is not a small moment in Elrond's biography. This is the hinge on which the entire Third Age turns. Every war that follows, every city that falls, every life lost in the long shadow of Sauron's persistence, every Nazgul that rides, every moment of darkness across 3,000 years of Middle-earth's history flows, in the end, from the refusal that Isildur made on that slope, in that heat, in front of Elrond's face. Elrond knows this. He has known it since the moment it happened. He has lived inside the consequence of Isildur's choice for 3 millennia. Watching the wound that should have been closed in the Second Age refuse to close, watching the darkness that should have ended persist in a diminished but never quite defeated form, because the thing that sustained it was never properly destroyed. He has watched the Nazgul rise. He has watched Mirkwood slowly become shadow. He has watched the careful work of the White Council, with Saruman and Gandalf and Galadriel and himself, working against a shadow that should not have needed working against. And now Isildur's descendant is standing in his hall, under his roof, in love with his daughter. It needs to be said plainly. Elrond does not distrust Aragorn as a man. He has raised Aragorn. He loves Aragorn with the completeness of someone who has watched a child grow under his care across decades of patient formation. But loving someone and trusting the pattern they carry are not the same thing. And the pattern Aragorn carries is Isildur's pattern. Blood of kings who have stood at the defining threshold of their age, and in that one bloodline's one catastrophic instance, chosen wrong. Picture this: Rivendell. A hall filled with the quality of light that seems to come from the stone and the trees rather than any particular source. Vilya working as it always works, the blue ring at Elrond's finger holding the valley in a state slightly outside ordinary time. Elrond is in council. Not the great council we see in the films, but one of hundreds he has held across centuries, the private kind, where the decisions that actually shape the age are made in small rooms by the people who understand what the stakes are. He is thinking about Aragorn. Aragorn is in the wild again, ranging through Eriador, fighting skirmishes that the rest of the world will never hear about, protecting a people who do not yet know they need a king. He is cold. He is dangerous in the particular way that people who have spent decades fighting alone in the dark become dangerous. Not reckless, but capable, with the kind of competence that does not need to announce itself. He is carrying Elrond's training in his body and Elrond's wisdom in his counsel. And he is carrying Elrond's blood in his veins through 67 generations and the ancient choice of Elros. And somewhere in Lorien, Arwen is thinking about him. Elrond knows this the way a father knows these things. Not through surveillance or intrusion, but through the particular attentiveness of someone who loves his daughter and has watched her face change since she first met that young man in the same year he was finally told who he was. The condition has not yet been stated aloud, but Elrond has been composing it in his mind for years, examining it from every angle, testing it against every possibility, hoping he would find a reason it did not need to be made. He has not found one. Here is a piece of lore that changes the entire frame of this story, and most people who love the films have never had to sit with it. Elrond had a twin brother. His name was Elros, and Elros made a choice that Elrond did not make. At the end of the First Age, when the War of Wrath was finished and Morgoth was thrust into the void, and the world was reorganized around the victory that had cost everything, the Valar extended to the sons of Eärendil a gift that was unprecedented in the history of Arda. Because their lineage was so tangled, elven through Thingol's line, Maian through Melian, and mortal through Beren and Tuor. The Valar permitted them to choose what they were, to decide their own kindred, to step to one side of the line or the other and stay there. Elrond chose to be counted among the elves. Elros chose to be counted among men, and so Elros died. He lived a long time by mortal reckoning, 500 years as the first king of Númenor, founding a civilization that would itself become one of the great tragedies of the Second Age. But he died. He grew old and faded and died, and Elrond buried the grief of it and moved forward into the Second Age alone, and then into the Third, and lived thousands of years beyond the full span of his brother's life, without ever not knowing what the choice had cost. Aragorn is a direct descendant of Elros. The lineage traces through Númenor's kings, through the disaster of Ar-Pharazôn and the survival of Elendil, through the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor and their long decline, through the Dunedain chieftains to Arathorn and then to Aragorn himself. 67 generations. When Elrond looks at Aragorn, he is looking across the full span of the Third Age and a significant portion of the Second, at the living consequence of his brother's decision to be mortal. Every time Elrond taught Aragorn the names of the stars, he was also teaching Elros his heir. Every time he healed Aragorn from some wound acquired in the wild, he was healing his brother's descendant. Every time Aragorn called him by the elvish equivalent of father, Elrond was receiving that love across the full length of the grief he has carried since the end of the First Age. The grief of a man who watched his other half choose mortality and has been living with that choice ever since. The letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, particularly letter 153, touched on something essential about Elrond that the films never find language for. Tolkien describes Elrond's power as fundamentally preservative. He does not command. He does not conquer. He maintains, fosters, holds in trust. He is, in the deepest sense, a librarian of civilizations, someone whose entire identity is organized around keeping things alive past the point where they would otherwise fade. He keeps Rivendell. He keeps the line of Isildur's heirs. He keeps the memory. He keeps the lore. He keeps. Now the world is asking him to let go. All at once, return to the condition. Because it is more specific than it first appears, and the specificity is where the weight lives. Appendix A records, in summary, Elrond's terms. Arwen will not be given in marriage unless Aragorn restores the kingdom of the Dunedain, meaning the kingship of both Gondor and Arnor, united, as it had not been united since the end of the Second Age. The films condense this into a vague challenge of worthiness. But Tolkien is precise, and the precision changes everything. Aragorn cannot simply be a good man. He cannot simply be a brave captain or a worthy partner. He must complete the political and dynastic work that has been unfinished since the kin strife ripped Gondor apart in the Third Age, since the North Kingdom collapsed under orc attack and internal dissolution, since Isildur's line became a line of wanderers instead of kings. The task that Elrond's condition specifies was left undone by failures that accumulated across centuries before Aragorn was born. This is not a task that can be accomplished by individual virtue alone. To restore the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor requires the One Ring to be destroyed, because Sauron's persistence is what prevents any king of Gondor from holding the throne securely, which requires the Fellowship to succeed, which requires a chain of events and choices and sacrifices from dozens of people across years of war, any one of which could fail at any point. The chain is fragile in ways that only Elrond with his scope of knowledge can fully see, and yet he stated the condition with this specific content, which means that at some level, perhaps despite the part of him that wished the condition could not be met, he believed it was possible, that the chain could hold, that Aragorn was the person at the end of that chain who would not be the breaking point. But there is something else in the condition that goes unexamined in almost every reading of it. The restoration of Gondor and Arnor requires, among other things, the use of Isildur's unfinished authority, the paths of the dead, the army of oath-breakers who swore to Isildur and broke their oath. The compulsion that can move them to service again flows through Isildur's bloodline to Aragorn, meaning that in order to take the final step toward kingship, Aragorn must invoke his ancestors' failure and transmute it into something useful. He must take the broken oath and make it serviceable. He must take what Isildur left undone and finish it, not by undoing Isildur's choice, but by carrying its consequences to their right conclusion. Elrond knows all of this. He sets the condition, knowing that buried inside it is the requirement that Aragorn succeed where Isildur failed. Not symbolically, literally, in the same mountain range, with the same ring involved, against the same enemy. The condition is not a test, it is a reckoning. In the chapter The Council of Elrond in the Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien gives us something the films reduce to a plot device, but the text renders as the most strategically candid speech Elrond ever delivers. He convenes the council. He brings together elves and men and dwarves and hobbits in the hidden valley he has maintained as a refuge against exactly this kind of crisis. He opens the archive of his knowledge, the full history of the ring, the forging in Sammath Naur, Sauron's betrayal, the last alliance, the cutting, the loss, the 3,000 years of diminishment and return. He lays it all out, and then he says something that the films do not include. He says, "This is the doom of the elves, that they shall fade, and the power of Elrond and Galadriel shall also wane, whether or not the one is destroyed. And if it is destroyed, then much else shall pass away that is fair and wonderful." The films cannot fit this into their version of Elrond because their version of Elrond is trying to win. The Elrond of the text is not trying to win. He is trying to ensure that if the loss is coming, and it is coming either way, the Third Age ends whether the ring is destroyed or not, the elves fade whether Sauron is defeated or not. Then let the loss at least purchase something worth what it costs. Hold that against the condition he set for Aragorn and Arwen. He is not withholding his blessing out of cruelty or pride or snobbery. He is making Arwen's choice contingent on the completion of the work the world actually requires. Arwen's immortality goes out one side of the ledger. The restored kingdom of men, the thing that Isildur refused to make possible at Oroduin, comes in on the other. And Elrond, who has spent 3 ages watching the ledger fail to balance, is insisting for the last time, with the last leverage he has, that the accounting be done correctly. This is not a father being difficult. This is a father who has lived long enough to understand that the things we love do not save us from consequences, and that if his daughter is going to choose mortality, the world she is choosing it for had better be worth the price she is paying. Picture this: the slopes of Mount Doom in the waning hours of the Second Age. Not the ruined landscape of later war, but Mordor, older than the War of the Ring, Sauron more recently defeated. The air still thick with the smoke of the last battle. Two figures in the aftermath. An ancient half-elven lord with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that carry centuries of grief like load-bearing architecture. Eyes that have seen the fall of Gondolin, the drowning of Beleriand, the death of Gil-galad, the loss that accumulates without stopping across an immeasurably long life. He has been standing for the better part of an age. He has been losing things for the better part of an age. He is standing at the edge of a volcanic crack in the earth with a man whose hand is closed around the ring. The man is a king, or what passes for a king, when the kingdom has just fought the longest war of the age and is mostly wreckage. He is tall and clearly once powerful, and he is holding the ring in his palm and looking at it with an expression that the ancient lord recognizes immediately, because it is an expression he has seen before on the faces of people who have already decided, not people who are deciding. People who have decided and are now looking for the language to announce it. The ancient lord speaks. The words are not preserved in full in any single text, but the shape of them comes through unfinished tales. Here, the fire is right here. End it. The king looks at the ring in his hand. He looks at the fire below. He looks at the ancient lord with his grief-weighted eyes, and he turns and walks away. And the ancient lord stands there in the smoke of Oroduin, watching Isildur's back, understanding with complete clarity that what just happened cannot be undone. That the age that was supposed to close has not closed. That the wound that was supposed to heal is going to fester across 3,000 more years that he will personally have to live through. That the shadow is not gone. It has merely gone quiet, and quiet is different from gone. 3,000 years later, he is standing in a different hall. A different man with the same blood is in front of him, and he is trying to figure out what he believes. There is something in the lore about Arwen's position in this story that rarely gets its full weight. The condition Elrond sets falls on Aragorn as a challenge. Aragorn must go out and do something. Aragorn has agency. He can fight, quest, prove, act. The task is enormous and the odds are long and the cost is terrible, but he can move toward it. There is a road, even if the road runs through the paths of the dead and across the Pelennor and through Mordor itself. Arwen waits. She waits in Rivendell and then in Lorien and then back in Rivendell, across decades of a life that is otherwise structured for immortality. She has made her choice. The appendices make clear that she has made it, that the decision is already settled in her heart long before Aragorn achieves what the condition requires. But the external world has not yet caught up with her interior certainty. She is stranded in the space between having chosen and being able to live inside what she has chosen. And Elrond watches her in this waiting. The appendices record that as the War of the Ring reaches its darkest period, Elrond summons Arwen for a conversation that Tolkien renders with characteristic restraint. He does not transcribe it in full. He gives us the shape of it, the emotional weather of it, and what he reveals is this: that Arwen bore whatever her father said to her with the endurance of someone who has already passed through the decision and is now living on its far side regardless of external confirmation. She had already left him. Not physically, in every way that mattered. And Elrond, who is not a fool and has never been a fool, understood this looking at her face. This is the moment, somewhere in the years before Aragorn's return to the south, when Elrond stops hoping that the condition will not be met. Not because he stops loving his daughter, not because the grief has diminished, but because he has looked at Arwen and understood that prolonging the waiting serves nothing. The condition was his last honest way of holding the door. She has already walked through it, and holding a door that someone has already walked through is not protection. It is just grief pretending to be strategy. You cannot understand Elrond's grief about Arwen without understanding what Arwen represents in the deepest architecture of Tolkien's mythology. And for that, you have to go to the Silmarillion. The story of Beren and Luthien is the romance of the legendarium. Tolkien, in his letters, is explicit about this. He calls it the kernel of the mythology, the story that contains within it the central thesis of everything he built. Luthien Tinuviel was the daughter of Thingol and Melian, the most beautiful of the Elvish women, a Maya's daughter who fell in love with a mortal man and chose to give up her immortality to be with him. Not because immortality was taken from her, because she chose to release it, walked to Manzus herself and made her case before the judge of the dead and was granted the choice to return to life as a mortal. She chose it because Beren was waiting. Elrond is descended from Luthien. The lineage runs through Dior to Eärendil to him. Luthien is not a distant historical figure in Elrond's reckoning. She is a presence in his blood, in the face he sees when he looks at Arwen. Tolkien says explicitly in the appendices that Arwen's likeness recalled to those who saw her the memory of Luthien Tinuviel, and in the choice that keeps recurring across the generations like a theme the music of Arda cannot resolve. And here is the thing that makes Elrond's position genuinely unbearable. Thingol also resisted. The Silmarillion records it. Thingol also set a condition when a mortal man came for his daughter. "Bring me a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown," he told Beren, "and you may have Luthien," which is, structurally, the same kind of condition Elrond sets for Aragorn. A task designed to be impossible. A way of saying, I cannot simply agree to this, because what you are asking me to agree to is too enormous for an ordinary yes. Beren brought the Silmaril. Aragorn brings the kingdom. Tolkien is not being subtle about the parallel. He is being precise. The love story of the Third Age is a retelling of the love story of the First Age, and Elrond's position in it is Thingol's position. The father who sets the impossible task and then watches, with grief and wonder cycling through him in equal measure, as the mortal man actually meets it. Which means Elrond has been, in some sense, preparing to occupy this role since before he was born. The pattern of his lineage required it. Luthien's choice flowed down through the generations until it arrived again, slightly modified, in his daughter's face. He could not have stopped it. He could never have stopped it. Picture this. A moment in Rivendell near the end of the Third Age. The light is the particular twilight of that valley, which has never entirely been the light of a specific time of day, but always seems to carry its own quality. The quality Vilya produces half-preserved from an older era. The waterfalls are audible. The trees are taller and stiller than trees anywhere else in Middle-earth. An ancient half-elven lord stands on a high terrace and looks out over what he has built and held across 600 years of custodianship. He knows, not as suspicion but as fact, the kind of fact that arrives in the bones before the mind can articulate it, that Vilya is running out of ground to stand on. That when the One Ring is destroyed, the power that sustains the three will fade with it. That Rivendell's quality of preserved peace, its slightly outside time stillness, will begin to unravel the moment Frodo's task is completed. He is not afraid. He has not been afraid of loss for a very long time, because fear requires the possibility of preservation, and he has been past that threshold for centuries. He grieves. There is a difference. He is thinking about the libraries, the healing houses, the decades of Dunedain chieftains sheltered here, fostered, given the knowledge and preparation to lead their wandering people. He is thinking about Aragorn as a boy, learning the stars from him, learning the histories, learning to be the kind of man the world was going to need him to be before Aragorn even understood why. He is thinking about the sea. Because when this is over, when the ring is destroyed or Sauron wins, when the Third Age ends one way or another, Elrond is going to the sea, west. Over the water to Valinor, where Gil-galad's people went, where the Noldor have been going in a quiet trickle across the centuries since they were permitted to return. He has been in Middle-earth longer than he needed to be. He has held on here past every reasonable departure point, and the time is coming when holding on will no longer be possible. He will sail without Arwen. She will stay in this world that is about to stop being the world he knows. In a mortal body she has chosen for love, living a mortal life that will have an end he will not be there to witness. And he will go without knowing when that end comes. That is the specific texture of the loss that is waiting for him. Not her death, which he will not see, but the going. The last time he looks at her. The last time she is standing on the side of the world where he is standing too. He does not know exactly how it will happen. He cannot see every detail. But he knows the shape of it. He has always known the shape of it. And he carries it with the same dignified endurance with which he has carried everything else, which does not make it lighter. Now here is the part that changes everything, because we have been building toward the moment in the appendices, that the films both adapted and fundamentally misread, and it requires seeing it clearly. Before the host of the West marches from Minas Tirith toward Mordor, toward what everyone involved understands is likely a death march, a feint designed to draw Sauron's eye away from Frodo long enough for the ring to be destroyed. Elrond comes to Aragorn. This is Tolkien's placement of this scene, not the film's placement, which moves it earlier for dramatic convenience. In the text, Elrond arrives at this moment, the last hours before the march. He brings several things. He brings Arwen's standard, which she has been making in Rivendell. The ensign of Elendil, the banner of the restored Dúnedain kingship, a piece of fabric that declares before any battle is fought what victory is supposed to mean and whose name it is supposed to restore. He brings counsel, and he brings the sword, and Duril, the flame of the west, Narsil reforged. The sword that was broken when Isildur's father fell before Sauron and lay in pieces through the entire Third Age, as a symbol of everything that was broken and not yet healed, now made whole, now given to Isildur's heir to carry into the final confrontation. Think about what Elrond is doing in this moment. He is not arriving to encourage Aragorn. He is arriving to complete the transaction. He is handing over the evidence that the condition has been met, or rather, that it is about to be met, that the machinery of its completion is already in motion, and all that remains is for Aragorn to walk the road it has prepared. He is presenting the sword and the banner and standing in front of this man and saying, without words, "Here is what I believe you are. Here is what I have always believed you would become. Now go prove that I was right to believe it." And then, the appendices record, he tells Aragorn about the paths of the dead. He tells him, take the road through Dunharrow. Take the road that requires you to invoke Isildur's authority over the Oathbreakers, the army of the dead who swore to your ancestor and broke their word and have been trapped since in the half-life of their broken oath. Call them. Use what Isildur began and left unfinished. Use it to complete what is needed. Elrond sends Aragorn to invoke Isildur's unfinished authority as the instrument of the final victory. The very failure that haunted the entire Third Age becomes, through Aragorn's hands, the mechanism of the Third Age's resolution. And Elrond is the one who points toward it and says, there, that is the road. He hands over the sword. He delivers the counsel. He turns and leaves. The appendices do not record his face. They do not need to. Now we arrive at the question in its full form, and it is heavier now than it was at the beginning, because everything this script has built is sitting inside it. Did Elrond set his condition for Arwen's hand because he believed Aragorn would meet it, or because some ancient, exhausted part of him hoped, quietly, without admitting it even to himself, that Aragorn would not? Let's take this apart. The case for the first reading. Elrond raised Aragorn. Elrond trained him, protected him, loved him, prepared him across decades of deliberate formation. He gave him Narsil's shards and the Ring of Barahir and the history of his own lineage. He set a condition whose content was precisely calibrated to require exactly the thing Aragorn was capable of, and he gave Aragorn everything he needed to become capable of it. He is not a fool, and he is not a liar. If he believed Aragorn could not meet the condition, setting it would be cruelty, and Elrond is not cruel. The case for the second reading. Elrond stood at the foot of Oroduin and watched Isildur make the wrong choice. He has lived inside that failure for 3,000 years. He carries Vilya, which is a ring of preservation, of holding on, and his entire identity is organized around the act of keeping, not the act of releasing. He loves his daughter. He knows that Aragorn's success means the end of the Third Age, the fading of Vilya's power, the sailing away from everything he has built, and the permanent loss of Arwen to the world of men. He is not, despite everything, a being who is immune to the wish that the unbearable thing might not happen. Both of these readings are true. They have always both been true. They coexist inside Elrond the way grief and love coexist inside anyone who has lived long enough to understand that the two are not opposites but companions, that the depth of one is always proportional to the depth of the other, that loving something completely means being unable to fully accept its loss, no matter how much you know the loss is coming. This is what Tolkien does with Elrond, that no film version has found the language for. He makes him fully, irreducibly complex, not divided against himself in a way that renders him paralyzed or dishonest or cowardly, divided against himself in the way that every person of genuine wisdom and genuine love is divided. Because genuine wisdom and genuine love are rarely pointing in the same direction, and the greatness of a life is measured partly by how well a person holds both without letting either destroy them. Elrond holds both. He has been holding both for 3,000 years. He holds them right up until the moment he hands Aragorn the sword and sends him down the road that will end the age and cost him his daughter. And he does it anyway. Pull back from the specific argument, from the particular lore, from Elrond and Aragorn and Arwen and Isildur individually. Pull back far enough to see what Tolkien is actually doing across the architecture of this story. Every great act of love in Tolkien's mythology costs immortality. Luthien chose mortality for Beren. Arwen chose mortality for Aragorn. Rivendell chose to be the bridge between worlds and gave up any settled life in either. The pattern is not accidental. Tolkien in the letters is explicit about what it means. The choice to love at the full depth of what you are without reservation, without the insurance of an immortal future to fall back on, is the most irreversible act available in the world of Arda. And it is the act that carries the most meaning precisely because it cannot be undone. Immortality is in some sense the ability to be wrong without it being final. Mortality is the commitment that makes the love real. Elrond has been living inside this truth for his entire existence. He has been carrying Luthien's choice in his blood for longer than the Third Age has been running. And now the echo of that choice has arrived in his own house, in his own daughter's face, and he is on the Thingol side of it. The father who must set the condition and watch the mortal man meet it, who must stand there as the pattern that has been running through his lineage since the elder days plays itself out one more time. He does not get to stop it. He never could have stopped it. It was always going to be this. The question of Middle-earth that Tolkien builds his entire mythology around is not whether good will defeat evil. Tolkien's cosmology establishes that Eru Ilúvatar's plan runs beneath everything, that the music of the Ainur holds the final shape, that evil is always parasitic and never creative, and cannot ultimately win. The real question is what the victory costs, whether the loss that makes the victory possible is borne with dignity and love, whether the people who must give up the most understand what they are giving up and choose it anyway. Elrond understands exactly what he is giving up. He has been understanding it for decades. He gives it up anyway. He helps the man he loves like a son become the man who takes his daughter away from him. He provides the sword and the counsel and the road. He stands aside. He does not collapse the condition or revoke it or find reasons to delay it further. He completes his own role in the story with the same fidelity that he has always brought to the things he holds in trust, even when what he is holding in trust is the mechanism of his own greatest grief. That is not a cold patriarch. That is not a disapproving father operating on prejudice. That is someone carrying more grief than most of Tolkien's heroes will ever accumulate across an entire story, and carrying it with the kind of quiet dignity that never stops being impressive precisely because it never calls attention to itself. And so we arrive at the question one final time, not the simple version from the cold open. The version it has become after everything this script has built through. Did Elrond set his condition for Arwen's hand because he believed Aragorn would meet it, or because some ancient, exhausted part of him hoped, quietly and without admitting it even to himself, that Aragorn would not? Here is what the question is actually asking. It is asking whether wisdom and selfishness can occupy the same heart in a person of genuine goodness. Whether someone who has lived long enough to understand everything can still be moved, not by corruption, not by pride, not by greed, by the simple, exhausted, entirely human desire to not lose the thing they love most. Whether 3,000 years of watching the world fail and endure, and fail again can produce, in even the wisest of hearts, a private and inadmissible wish that the last test would be the one test that is not passed. Tolkien does not answer it. The appendices record what Elrond does: the sword, the counsel, the paths of the dead, the turning and leaving, but they do not record what he wanted. They cannot record it, because wanting and doing are not the same thing. And the greatness of Elrond as a character is precisely that he does the right thing regardless of what he wanted, and that we are never quite permitted to know with certainty whether the right thing and the desired thing were ever, for him, aligned. He wanted his daughter to stay. He helped Aragorn become the man she was leaving for. Both things are true, neither cancels the other. The grief of holding both at once. The grief of a man who loves his daughter enough to help her toward the choice that takes her from him, who trusts Aragorn enough to hand him the sword that ends the age, who has lived long enough to know that the pattern always completes itself, and has accepted this without ever quite making peace with it. That grief is the truest thing in Elrond's character, more truthful than anything the films found language for. If you have a reading, if you think you know which side of the question he was really on, or whether the question even has a side, tell me in the comments. Tell me whether you read Elrond's condition as the act of a man who believed in completely and acted from that belief, or as the act of a man who was buying time against an ending he had already accepted, but could not stop reaching back toward. Tell me whether wisdom in Tolkien's world ever fully tames grief, or whether the ones who have lived longest are simply the ones with the most practice at carrying what cannot be put down. Because I have sat with this question through everything the Legendarium offers, and I do not have a clean answer. I have only the lore. And the lore is sadder and more beautiful than any single answer could contain. If this is the kind of deep dive that changes how you see Middle-earth, if you want to keep following the thread past the films, past the familiar, into the parts of the Legendarium that almost nobody talks about, subscribe. This world is larger than any adaptation has ever shown you, and there is so much more of it left to see.